Hi friends, welcome to Raising Lifelong Learners. I'm your host, Colleen Kessler, and this is the podcast where I encourage you to trust yourself and your differently wired kiddos as you help cultivate their curiosity, encourage them to discover the world around them, embrace who they are wired to be, all while helping them discover their passions, interests, and raise them to become the amazing adults they're meant to be. Hey, welcome back. This is episode 220. I am super excited to be talking today to Dr. Gail Post, a clinical psychologist and parenting consultant who specializes in working with families who have gifted and twice exceptional kiddos. She has been in practice for over 35 years. She has 2 gifted young adults of her own. Her writing includes hundreds of articles, book chapters, a long-standing blog called Gifted Challenges, and a brand new book called The Gifted Parenting Journey. Our conversation ran the gamut through all sorts of topics related to parenting and homeschooling gifted and twice exceptional kiddos. I know there's going to be so many different things that you can get out of this conversation, so I want you to settle in and get ready for all of these gold nuggets. Before we get started though, special shout out and thanks to our sponsors for this episode, CTC Math, check them out at ctcmath.com, and Reading Eggs, readingeggs.com. Both are great online programs that help homeschooling parents do a great job for their kids. So check them out. We appreciate their support. Now, if you have any special takeaways from this episode, I really want to hear about them. So make sure you pop over to the show notes for this episode and shoot me a voicemail or type a message through the contact form that goes to my email box. I want to hear what you have to say. In the meantime, let's pop those earbuds in, get settled in for this really, really rich episode. Let's get on with it. I am so excited about our guest today. Actually, we have known each other kind of peripherally online for years and years and years, but this is the first time that we've ever connected. So I'm really excited to bring Dr. Gail Post to the episode today, to the podcast. Welcome, Gail. I'm so excited you're here.
Thank you so much for having me on your wonderful podcast. And it is great to meet you in person, sort of on Zoom, I guess, sort of in person, but thank you for having me here. Excited.
Yeah, virtually in person. It's an interesting world we live in, right? We can be connected,
Yes.
But we still don't know each other in person.
Right.
Why don't you take a quick second and tell listeners a little bit about you and your background and your kind of focus, if you will.
Okay. Well, I'm a clinical psychologist licensed in Pennsylvania, but I also have something called PsyPact authorization, which allows me to provide telehealth in something like 30 plus states in the US. I also offer some parent coaching to help with learning a little more about what might best serve your child, especially in terms of their education and college planning, all of that good stuff. I have 2 young adults who are gifted and got involved. I did not homeschool them, but had to find lots of home education to supplement their learning. So I was on that track as well. But they were in the public schools, and I got involved with a parent advocacy group and was co-chair of that. And we tried to implement changes in the schools, issues such as universal identification and all of that. And when my youngest graduated a little over 10 years ago, I wanted to continue to advocate, so started writing my blog, Gifted Challenges, and focused mostly on not personal stories, although some of that certainly leaks in, but parenting, advocacy, social, emotional issues, all of that, and continued writing in other realms. I have a book that came out this past year called The Gifted Parenting Journey, which focuses on parents' unique experience raising a gifted or twice exceptional child, and the importance of gaining self-awareness, self-reflecting, knowing yourself so you can parent at your best. And that's pretty much the overview. But thanks for asking.
Yeah, I love that. And one of the things really in kind of that encapsulation of your work, well, first, I was first introduced to you personally through the Gifted Challenges blog way back when blog hops were still a thing, right? We were both on those blog hops for the Gifted Homeschoolers Forum.
Right.
Yeah. And so I would, we'd read each other's kind of posts as we all connected on the same theme in the month and then commented on each other's posts and articles and blogs. And I just remember resonating so much as a parent of gifted kids myself with the things that you'd written from that perspective. I think that's a valuable perspective, is that the perspective that you have as a clinical psychologist who works with this population, as well as a parent who's raised kids within that population. Because a lot of times, and I know I've talked to other parents who have worked with me, the same kind of thing, a gifted background in the classroom and then raising my own kids. When you have both sides of it, it gives you a different understanding than if you just had the clinical side or the parenting side. I remember when I first had my oldest identified, I wanted to go back and apologize to some of those parents who had come through my gifted program, because I realized I didn't know what I didn't know. And so just that balance and coming from the two different perspectives gives you insight that you wouldn't have otherwise.
Yeah, I really agree. It certainly helps to have that lived experience for sure. And the other thing is finding support. So, for example, through GF or SANG or wherever somebody chooses to go. But I know that when I was involved with a parent advocacy group, we were advocating for changes and benefits in the schools, but also we got a lot of support from each other. And it was so helpful talking to other parents who were going through the same thing. So, in spite of my education, I had an education as a parent and learned a lot along the way, and then tried to get as knowledgeable as possible about everything in the field.
Yeah, that's so important, finding those resources that you can connect with. And there are all sorts
Mhm.
of groups, both in person and online. I remember speaking at the Ohio Association for Gifted Children conferences when I was a teacher of gifted, and then going back as a parent of gifted for their parent day. Most organizations, and we'll link to some in the show notes for this episode, most organizations from the National Association for Gifted Children, SANG, supporting the emotional needs of gifted, and others have parent groups or parent days as part of their
Mhm.
conferences or conventions. So it's worth reaching out to other parents through those organizations if you're feeling isolated and alone, because it really is, we're raising outliers. And so, by that very definition, there aren't always going to be people in your direct backyard that understand kind of what you're going through, which actually brings me to one of the things that I wanted to talk about today. You talk in your book and in your site, and probably in your practice as well with parents, about the idea and the need, right, to manage kind of our own emotions and feelings as we're working with our kids, or being their kind of punching bag as they're going through things, or their dumping ground as they're figuring things out, or just their support. How do you balance that, managing when you're triggered or you're for and about them, and finding your way through that to help and support while keeping yourself kind of in check?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's interesting because as we watch our kids struggle to fit in, it's really hard for them to find a peer group, other kids that really get them. We as parents have what in psychology terms is often defined as a parallel process where we're also feeling isolated and different. And when you talk to neighbors or babysitters or anyone you encounter, they're not going to quite get what you're talking about unless they've gone through it for the most part, or they know someone well who's gone through this. So there's a sense of isolation as well. And a lot of the child raising guidelines don't always fit with these kids, these high energy, super curious little junior lawyers who debate you. They have this intensity, this sensitivity. A lot of the routine stuff doesn't work. So some of the stuff that you as a parent might have encountered, advice you see online, advice from neighbors, extended family, just doesn't work. And then you're feeling even more isolated and more frustrated when your child acts up, or when you're at, the grocery store line and your 4-year-old's reading all the labels, but then has a meltdown because you won't buy them a candy bar, and the cashier's looking like, what is going on here? So it's always puzzling, and it brings up a lot of feelings. It could be embarrassment or frustration or guilt or regret. And those feelings color how we parent. So one of the important things is really finding as much support as possible in your life for people that really get you. They don't have to always agree with you, but they have to get you. And that could be your partner or spouse. It could be a family member you really trust, a close friend, someone in one of the gifted groups you might be attending, another parent of a gifted child. I remember sitting on the soccer field when my kids were young and chatting with this other mom whose child was a close friend of my son's and really understood what was going on, was going through the exact same things. And we kind of huddled together talking about resources and what to do. It's really important to find people like that. So to have that and then to develop your own, I dare I say self-care protocol, because self-care kind of gets a bad rap. Everybody thinks it's like either bubble baths and bonbons or a rigorous exercise routine that they can't depart from. But it's actually just checking in with yourself and knowing what will calm you, what will restore you, what will energize you, and making sure you make space for that, because you're not going to parent well unless you have that space.
Yeah, I actually recently did an episode, we'll have to link to it in the show notes, about self-care and that very idea that it's so much more and more important really than the cliche it's become. And the kind of revelation that I had about 6 or 8 months ago when I was feeling guilty for just taking the afternoon off and reading a book and, chilling out, that we're the only example of a healthy adulthood our children have, right? They have a front row seat to how we're handling all of those stressors. And so it is important to show them that you allow yourself time to decompress and you allow yourself time for hobbies and you allow yourself time to further your own learning and whatever that is, whether you work outside the home or not, whether your primary job is homeschooling them or you're splitting your time between other things. You have to show them how to be a well-rounded, healthy adult through your actions and not just your words, because that's what speaks the loudest. And then ultimately, it makes you a better parent. It builds your relationship with them. So self-care, throw out the bubble bath and bonbons idea, except if that is something that brings you joy, do it. But yeah, super important to really take care of yourself in this process.
And that is such an excellent point, that it's so important to know that we are the role models for our children and we don't have to be perfect. So everybody has a bad day. Everybody gets mad and frustrated. Everybody goes through stressful times that are really depleting. And to let your child see how you take care of yourself, and also that you don't need them to shore you up, that they don't have to take care of you, that you can say, yeah, I'm really upset today. My boss yelled at me, or I'm really upset because, I didn't get invited to my old friend's wedding, or whatever it is. And then to say, but I'll get through it. I'll figure it out. And you don't have to worry about me, essentially. So to show them that you can be upset just like they get upset, but there are ways through it, and you model that. So that's a really important point.
Yeah. It's hard to remember in the moment. And I think that that's where we kind of self-sabotage a lot. And then we get down about it and then it becomes a cycle. So when we start to get into that cycle, or when we're trying to figure out, are we cycling down, spiraling downward, or are our children spiraling downward? How do we know when it's the normal ups and downs of parenting these complex kids and differentiating between when it's time to go seek outside help? You work with parents of kids who are complex like this, and you also work with kids themselves. How do you know when your kid needs help, or you need help, or both of you need help? And how do you navigate that idea of
Yeah,
finding the right help? Because not everybody is a good fit for a gifted or
right.
twice exceptional
Right.
child.
Yeah, that's those are some really great questions. So for ourselves, first of all, we need to try to tune into what we're feeling, to notice even the physical sensations. Is your jaw clenched? Are you feeling this tightness in your chest? That's a warning sign. You may not be able to identify what the emotion is initially, but that it tells you something is amiss and you need to attend to it. And then to develop skills over time for calming yourself. It could be, again, healthy distractions like reading a great book or listening to music, going for a walk in the woods, or some formal exercises in terms of breathing regulation skills or meditation. So, and exercise, certainly releasing your energy. And that goes for our kids as well. We know what happens when they don't get enough exercise. It's a recipe for disaster. The same thing for us as adults. So even if it's 10 o'clock at night and you're not going to go out for a run, to do something physical if you feel that anger bubbling up. Take a breather, go in the other room before you say something you regret. Think about the kind of person you want to be and how you want to show your kids how to relate and resolve conflict. So to just pay attention to that. As a parent, if you find yourself, though, repeatedly screaming and yelling constantly, or feeling really distressed or depressed, can't get out of bed, trouble sleeping, loss of appetite, engaging in unhealthy behaviors, which could be, excessive alcohol intake, overeating, overspending, gambling, any of that. Those are often warning signs that we need some additional help. And it's important to seek that out. And the same thing for our kids. We often become pretty good at noticing if our child's heading for a meltdown. And sometimes it's basic things. They didn't have a snack. They didn't, get their nap if they're a young child, or they're coming home from school and and they look really grumpy. Something happened, whether it was an interpersonal incident or bad grade on a test, something like that. And to notice that and to help guide them toward ways they can calm themselves and get support. But again, in your child, certainly, if they complain about being depressed and anxious, that that's really going on. But a lot of kids don't verbally say that. So you have to look for signs like, is there a change in their behavior? Are they suddenly super moody, way more than usual? Are they isolating themselves in their room and not seeing their friends anymore, not even communicating with friends? Are they, on the flip side, are they spending 24/7 on social media, which often can trigger a lot of negativity? So to really look at that, and certainly if they're behavioral signs, their grades suddenly drop dramatically. You're getting reports from the school that they're acting up, or if you're homeschooling them, if they're suddenly refusing to do their work or refusing to pay attention, if they aren't running around outside anymore with their friends, or they're not communicating, these are all signs that perhaps you need some additional help. And to answer your other question about how to find help, that's often a tricky one. There's been a lot of publicity, especially during the pandemic, about the dearth of mental health resources. And that's particularly true in rural areas, but there's just not a lot available. But even in urban or suburban areas, it can be hard to find someone. Often the best bet would be to check with your pediatrician and see whom he or she recommends. Sometimes people go to a spiritual leader if they're involved in a church or synagogue. Sometimes going to people you know whose child is in therapy and asking, what do you think about that therapist? Would they be somebody that would be a good fit for my child? A lot of people go through their insurance company and get recommendations, but frankly, a lot of times the people who answer the phone, they just go through a random list and they don't even listen to whether your child would be a good fit for that person. Sometimes looking at sites like Psychology Today, you can get some idea, but again, someone can have a really wonderful website and it doesn't mean they're going to be the right fit. If you're, in terms of giftedness, obviously it's ideal to find someone who has some specialty or knowledge in giftedness or twice exceptionalities, but that often doesn't happen. I mean, you can sometimes get referrals through your state-based Gifted Education Association, through SANG, supporting the emotional needs of the gifted, or through Hoagie's Gifted. But again, it's far and few between. So, I would suggest just asking around anyone that you know, and eventually you may find someone. But having that expertise isn't always critical. You want to find someone who listens to you, who relates well to your child, who relates well to you, and is open to learning more if they don't have that gifted knowledge base. You really just want someone who gets you and gets your child.
Yeah, a friend, well, an online friend, somebody that I had met online, her husband is a child psychologist in another state. And she said that he would always tell parents that, and patients in general, that it's like dating. Finding the right psychologist or therapist is like dating, when you know, because the most important thing is that you can communicate with each other. Because if you feel uncomfortable, or like you're not clicking, or you're not being heard, or you're not able to hear them in the way that they're presenting, then you're not going to make progress. And I remember way back when we've seen a couple different people over the years for different children for different reasons. The very first time we ever went to therapy, it didn't feel right. It didn't feel like a good fit, but I didn't know that you could shop around, for lack of a better term. And we stuck with this person for a little too long. And it was harder on my son. It felt like it did more damage than help. And it was the third person we found that was like, oh my gosh, that's exactly what it was like. You knew when you knew. And he opened up and he was having conversations and really got a lot out of it. So I just want to reiterate that importance. Yes, if you can find somebody who gets gifted kids or gets kind of the quirky brain, then you go with that. But you need somebody that your child is going to feel comfortable with, or if it's therapy for you, which again can be something really important, especially moms as we age. Like I'm learning this as I go. My premenopausal brain is totally different. It feels like going through puberty all over again, right? With those ups and downs. And my toleration or tolerance threshold is different than it once was. And so, if you get to a point where you just need to talk to somebody else, it's the same thing. Feel good about the give and take and like you can talk to this person. But the other thing that I want to reiterate, because it's so important to piggyback off of what you just said, Gail, is that it's really brave to seek help. And you should never let yourself push through to the point where you're breaking down. If you're starting to feel that all of those things that you've tried, the breathing techniques, the finding a hobby that works for you, regulating your own emotions through the things that you've read or you've tried, from different sites like ours, before you get to that point of complete overwhelm and breakdown, it's a super brave thing to go get the help that you need from somebody outside of your immediate world.
Absolutely. It's so important. And unfortunately, some people still carry a sense of shame or stigma about it. People ask, who's your dentist? But they don't say, who's your therapist? So it's really important to try to put those thoughts aside and realize that someone sitting with you and having a different perspective and who's not a personal friend or someone in your life can offer that objectivity. But I agree with what you're saying about shopping around. It's so important. And if you're looking for someone for yourself or for your child, to maybe schedule a brief phone consult with someone, at least several people, and then to shop around, even with interviewing, even though you might have to pay some money that, it's not someone you're going to continue to see, you at least get a sense. When I work with teens and adults, and when I see parents and their child for the first time, I often suggest two options. One is that I meet with both of them for a short time and then spend time with the child and then with the parent. Or the other option, and I think this actually makes sense, and if it were my child, I would do this, to meet initially for the parent consult, because the therapist is going to want to get history anyway and get to know more. But that gives you an opportunity to see, do I like this person? Will I trust this person with my child? Because it's not a great thing if you bring your child to see someone and they really like the therapist, but you don't, and then you have to kind of pull your child out of there, and that's not always the best. So you have to feel comfortable, like, will this person, on the one hand, guard my child's confidentiality? Someone my child can trust to say things maybe they're not going to tell me, but also keep me in the loop because we're a family. And the idea is shoring up the family to make sure that we all relate, not a therapist who's like, well, it's just my relationship with the child. And unfortunately, it doesn't happen that much anymore, but maybe like 40 years ago, that was kind of the trend. But you want to be included. That doesn't mean the therapist is going to be a pipeline and share everything the child says, but they're going to tell you if there's something concerning going on or help you and your child communicate better. So you have to all feel comfortable, and that does involve some shopping around and also speaking up. If you're, usually the first session, it's kind of nerve-wracking for anyone starting, but if after a little while you don't feel understood or you feel the therapist misinterprets something, you have to speak up to clarify. And if that doesn't get resolved, then they may not be the best fit for you.
Hey there. Okay, so I want to tell you a little bit more about CTC Math. We've been using it for a few years now, and I had a conversation with my daughter the other day. She came to me and she said, Mom, I was going to the next lesson in my math program, and she said, I looked at it and it's something that I already know how to do. Do you want me to go through and just keep doing it? That seems kind of boring. And so we glanced through the different lessons that were in the unit, and she did. She could tell me exactly what she knew and proved that she knew all of the stuff that was coming up over the next 10 lessons. So I said, okay, skip it. You don't need to do something that you already know how to do, and you just proved to me that you know how to do it. That's just one of the reasons I love CTC Math. I've said before that they are sponsors of this podcast, and I'm so grateful to their sponsorship, but I'm also a customer. I pay for my subscription every year, and I have for the last several years. We are strong supporters of CTC Math. We love them. We appreciate them for so many reasons, and that is just one. And I'm not the only one. I've gotten a couple emails recently. This one's from Jamie. Jamie said, at your recommendation, we switched over to CTC Math last month. We have used another curriculum for several years, but it just wasn't meeting our needs anymore. Now we've settled into a good rhythm. The kids are loving it, and I love that we are able to adapt it for each of their individual needs. Thank you so much for the recommendation. Jamie, I love that, and I was so excited to hear it because it just goes to show I'm not the only one who has had that experience from CTC, being able to adjust on the fly as our kids are learning. I love, love, love that. If you haven't had a chance to check it out, go to ctcmath.com. You will not be sorry. Okay, are you looking for a reading program for your kiddos that they are going to love? Imagine a curriculum that doesn't just teach your homeschooled kids to read, but turns learning into fun. That's Reading Eggs. Seriously, it's designed for kids 2 to 13. It covers phonics, sight words, comprehension, spelling, and more, all backed by solid scientific research. It's trusted by over 20 million users worldwide. It's the go-to choice for homeschoolers everywhere. We have used it off and on throughout the years, depending on which kid needed what. And here's the best part. The program works at your child's level. It builds their confidence and helps them stay motivated. It's KidSafe certified, completely ad-free. And when you sign up, you get a free 30-day trial and get instant access to hundreds of lessons, worksheets, ebooks, and detailed reports with access for up to 4 kids. Seriously, 4 kids right off the bat and access to the whole program. You can try it full on out for 30 days without any commitment. You don't have anything to lose. You can make learning to read easy, fun, and nurture a lifelong love of reading along the way. Check it out at readingeggs.com/RLL. That's readingeggs.com/RLL. Yeah, I love that. I know a lot of parents, because of that lingering stigma, right, worry that if they take their kids in for therapy, they're not going to know anything that's going on, and their child's going to be, I don't know, converted to not telling them anything ever again.
Yeah.
And so it goes back to you're building a team, right, of support. And that team includes people you can talk to about your kid, people your kid feels comfortable with, and that, you know, are like-minded peers, maybe not same age peers, and then tutors and teachers and resources and outside classes and therapists and doctors and coaches and in all those different areas of need. And so making sure that whomever you're working with, in whatever situation you're working with them, see you as part of the team, because your child still is a child, right? Whether they're 8 or 16, right? So that's important. And I love that you reiterated that idea of your therapist should be talking to you to some degree. We were just talking to, like I said, my kids have gone through therapy at different stages in their life for different reasons. And we were just looking for a new person. And that was exactly my experience with the phone call. We prefer to have a parent come in first so we can get a history and we can talk about what the concerning things are. And then, you know, we'll schedule after. And immediately I felt like, okay, this is going to be a team. This is a great situation. And so call around, talk around, look at the websites, like Gail said, read what they specialize in. Most of the websites I've been across over the last couple of years show at least brief bios of each of the therapists or psychologists or psychotherapists who work within practices. And so, and then if you're struggling or if you're in a rural area, like we mentioned earlier, there are options for telehealth and resources out there. So we will make sure, Gail, that we link to your website, because I know that there are people who listen to this podcast that don't feel that they have resources within driving distance or that they can trust. And at least they could reach out potentially and see if their state is on that list.
That's a good plan. It is so important, again, as you said, to find the right fit. So that can be a bit of a challenge.
Mhm.
So I wish everyone well in doing that because it can be a challenge. And like what you said about websites, a lot of times you have to kind of look behind the fluff sometimes and just really get down to the basics, like what is their background, what's their experience, how do they present themselves, even in writing online. If it seems like, and you don't see this that much, but like a hard sell, then you
Mhm.
kind of have to wonder about that.
Yeah. Yeah. So, such a good point. Okay, I'm going to shift a little bit and I want to talk a little bit more about your book. So the book is about the parenting journey, right? Can you tell me a little bit about just kind of an overview of the book? And then maybe we can talk for a little bit here about some of the topics and some of the normal concerns that we have as parents of gifted kids and twice exceptional kids.
Okay, well, thanks. Well, it was sort of a labor of love that came out of writing a lot for the past 10 years. And my kind of mission, I think, to help parents realize that they can figure it out, but they may need some support, but they can figure it out themselves as long as they really delve deeply into who they are. There aren't a lot of other books about that concept. There's one from Siegel and Hartzell, from Dan Siegel, that is Parenting from the Inside Out, that really encourages that. But I really believe, from what I've seen in my own life, but certainly in my clinical practice, that we have to understand ourselves and our motivations so that we have more clarity. So the book is based on, I include a lot of theory, a lot of research. There isn't a lot of research at all about the parents' lived experience. It's mostly about what's going on with the kids. But I include all of that, the importance of support, the importance of self-awareness, and then some of the emotions that parents typically experience: anxiety, guilt, regret, embarrassment, envy, confusion, all of that, and what to do about it. And then just some basic parenting advice at the end. I also included information from a survey that I sent around prior to publishing the book. I sent it around online in different sites, websites, on some Facebook parenting groups, all of that, and was really thrilled to get 428 responses, which was amazing. And around 40% of those folks had children who did not have a twice exceptional condition, but the remaining 60% did. So a lot of folks with kids who are struggling with anxiety, ADHD, sensory processing disorders, learning disabilities, and included some of the data from that in the book. I am actually working on some actual research that we hope to publish in research journals with Barry Gelston, who's used to be head of GHF, and he's a really good math guy, so he's good with the statistics, but trying to pull that together, because I think it's so important to look at what the parents' experience is, what they worry about the most, so parents don't feel so alone with that. So anyway, that's pretty much a summary of the book. But I'm hoping that it can help some folks on this journey that they have as parents.
Yeah, hearkening back to something that you said earlier, that idea that, those parenting books, the typical parenting books just don't work for people who are raising kids like this. And it's not that I tell this to my kids actually all the time. It's not bad or good or better or worse. It's just different. And so when you're bombarded though with anything that you can get in a bookstore, just the typical average child, you feel like you're doing something wrong, especially new parents, right? If it's your first child and you're watching your friends who had children at the same time able to do things or do things differently than or more easily, right, than you are, it's so important to have something that you can take off the shelf. I remember I was a teacher, I was a nanny, and I still felt like a failure with my oldest. He did some really different things when he was young. And then the challenges that we had grow, into adolescence and now young adulthood are almost like parenting on steroids, right? Because everything's more intense or more difficult, or there's just a little slightly different edge to almost every encounter. So it's important for parents to have something to see that reiterates that yes, they may be in the smallest pieces of that bell curve, but they're still not alone in there, right?
Right, right. Yeah, it's so complicated because, as I mentioned earlier, and as you're mentioning, there aren't there isn't a big peer group, right? There aren't a lot of other parents going through the same thing. And even if your child does not have a twice exceptional condition, they may have asynchronous development where some of their social and emotional maturity lags behind their intellect. So it's really puzzling and very and difficult to cope with. Like my child can talk a blue streak about, the topic of interest, but they're having a meltdown when the other kids seem just fine, or they don't know how to relate and talk to their peers. They might talk down to them or seem bossy or withdraw. And it's really tough as parents to notice that. So the more we can feel supported that this is actually normal and what we're going through is normal. And that, the other thing is that one thing parents, I think, come across as they're raising a child like this is memories from their own childhood. And a lot of times parents don't realize their child is gifted is because, well, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Usually parents of gifted kids have been gifted themselves, even if they weren't identified. But what might seem normal in their family isn't typical or quote unquote normal. So your child talks before the age of 1 and you're like, well, I was supposedly taught before the age of 1, so that must be normal, but no, it's not. So to realize that one thing is that parents often don't realize they're gifted. And actually in the survey I sent around, 25% of people indicated that they suddenly realized they were gifted after having a gifted child because it never occurred to them and they weren't identified. So we learn a lot about ourselves. It puts our own childhood in perspective for better or worse. And that's all information we can learn from.
Yeah, that idea that you mentioned earlier of parallel process, that there's so many parents that I've spoken with, and I'm sure you have the same experience, that realize or they're seeing some of the things from their own childhood amplified in front of them, and there is a tremendous amount of guilt that goes along with that, right? Because we naturally feel that we passed this down to our kid and we're making it. I think that with that guilt thing, I want to backtrack for just a second, because I think that the idea of feeling badly for what your child is going through or wishing your child were different gets a little bit of a bad rap. I think it's healthy and normal to kind of feel like they're missing out and mourn that a little bit, as long as you don't dwell in that, right? Because I don't
Right.
think parents who wish their kids' lives were different wish for different kids. I think that they wish their child's path was easier than the one they experience, and they're they're feeling that struggle again through the eyes of watching their kids struggle. And so I think taking a moment to acknowledge that, recognize that that might be something that you struggled with and that now your child's going to struggle with, and you wish it were different for them, as long as you take that and then you move forward in a proactive way to help them through it by using your own experiences and your own thoughts and feelings from the past to improve their future and apply it.
Right. I love what you said about mourning the loss, but not dwelling. I think that really says it all, that we need child's accomplishments, but to know that this is not what we planned. We don't want our child to struggle. We don't want them to suffer emotionally or socially. I think you made such an excellent point about the importance of mourning the loss, but also not dwelling on it. That as parents, we need to acknowledge that we don't want life harder for our kids or for ourselves. If you're homeschooling or very involved in your child's activities at the school in terms of advocacy, that's extra work for you. You don't just send a gifted kid, put them on the bus, send them off and wave goodbye, and everything's going to be fine. Occasionally they might have a teacher they don't like, or they don't always do their homework, the normal stuff, right? Not all this complicated difficulty, that we encounter. And to acknowledge that this is hard, and then to figure out, okay, but that's what I've been dealt, and what do I do to move on from here, and how to help my child find as many resources as possible that will support them feeling quote unquote normal, like they find their niche. And sometimes that's extracurricular activities that meet their interests, or homeschooling co-op with other gifted kids, but just to really acknowledge that this is hard, but you'll get through it.
I love that. That's just such a great kind of almost conclusion, right, to this. It's a great message for parents. I think it's so important for us to remember that this is hard. And that's why resources like the Gifted Challenges blog in Gail's book and my site and so many others that we've linked to over the years are there for you, because we who live it and work with the population recognize that there's just not as much support as there is for other challenges and issues because it's, again, we're in the outlier section, right? Okay, so if, as we wrap this up, if there was one thing you could say to especially a homeschooling parent of a gifted or twice exceptional kiddo as they're navigating all of the various differences, right? Something that they could remember as they go from the the young to the like intermediate and then to the teen challenges and then to the moving into adulthood. What is the one thing to remember as we're parenting our kids through all the different changes that we're going to be seeing through their lives?
Well, I think it's recognizing and appreciating the child in front of you, that they may not be what you expected, but here they are. And here they are with these amazing gifts and talents. And I don't necessarily mean because of accomplishments. I mean, their sense of self, who they are in the world is a gift for all of us as parents. And to enjoy that, appreciate their sense of humor or their curiosity or their energy. And to know that most kids bring some challenges along the way, and theirs are interesting and different, and we have the skills to accommodate them.
I love that. That's just so perfect. I absolutely love that. Gail, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate your
Thank you.
time. And as I wrap this up for those of you listening, we'll have links to all of Gail's resources, her websites, her book on the show notes for this episode at raisinglifelonglearners.com/podcast. And then there will also be links at that bottom of that post to other resources like some of the organizations that have parent groups, some of the different topics that we talked about here, how to find therapists and support. Gail mentioned Hoagie's and some of the other places. And then as well as links to articles both on my site and Gail's site that relate to asynchronous development and twice-exceptionalities and things like that. So make sure you check that out because it's just going to have tons and tons of resources for this topic. And again, thank you so much for being here. I know there's lots of ways to spend your day as a listener. And Gail, you've got lots of things pulling at your time. So I really, really appreciate that you spent it with us.
Well, thank you, and thank you for the work you do, because getting the message out through podcasts is so important as another support for parents. While they're driving in the car listening, or while they're out going for a walk, to be able to listen and recognize that they're not alone. So I appreciate the work you do.
Thank you.